And welcome on in to the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Alman here with you along with Zach Alman with that. Took a couple weeks off, but we are right back at it again with some Dynasty content here in the off season.
Yeah, Brett, really excited for this off season. A lot going on in the last couple of weeks where we have not had a podcast, but we're ready to go. I'm excited for it.
So once again, congratulations to all those, and it's been a few weeks, but congrats to those who had Week 17 championship matchups. Last time we were at least on the air, and now we're up into the thick of it, and some big news coming in the NFL. We're going to break down some of that. We'll get in the later in the episode into some of the guys that were let go, or some of the guys that were let go, then some of the guys that were retained or hired, and then after that, we're going to get into some of our offseason buy low candidates, guys that their value might not be as high right now as what it could be in the middle of next season. And then next week, we're going to hit some of those sell highs. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, please subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, and give us the thumbs up. Zach, we got to start with some breaking news that happened here in the last hour. Jim Harbaugh has been hired by the Los Angeles Chargers, leaving Michigan after national championship, and now he heads to Hollywood.
Yeah, Brett, a huge hire for Los Angeles, and I think it's a really great hire for the Chargers because they really slowed down on offense at a lot of points last year. Herbert, of course, got injured. They lost a couple of wideouts during the year, but things just weren't consistent for that Chargers offense. And Jim Harbaugh now full of confidence coming off that national championship with Michigan. And I mean, he should be a really solid fit with the Chargers now this upcoming season.
Yeah, I'm really curious now because it's a big offseason for this team, the Chargers, and there's a lot of talk about what to do with the wide receiver position, and Mike Williams potentially a cut candidate, Keenan Allen potentially a cut candidate. They have obviously Austin Eckler, free agent right now, and so who's going to be retained, who's going to come back, who's going to be cut. And I think that there's a lot of question marks, and obviously the health of Justin Herbert right now is seeming to be the thing that's on the front of people's minds. I think he'll be okay, at least from the reports that, they kind of were just shutting him down for the season. The season was done, and so they were doing their due diligence by making sure that he was okay. Kind of interesting that there's no Michigan players actually on the entire roster of the Los Angeles Chargers. I'm curious to see if that changes come springtime as Harbaugh looks at the draft and bringing in potentially one or two of his guys.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if there were a couple. Obviously, winning the national championship, there's a lot of talent on that roster that Michigan had. So I would definitely expect Harbaugh to bring some of those guys over to Los Angeles.
And again, just curious what happens at those bigger positions because we're not sure what Jim Harbaugh thinks about some of those guys. And obviously he hasn't been in the league for very long, but he has a brother who's playing across the way in Baltimore. And actually we will get that matchup next year, Harbaugh, as the two of them will go head to head. And, I'm curious to see if they put that one on national television as well. Even if they don't, sure to be a good one. And it is that we watched them a couple of years back play when Jim was out playing or coaching for San Francisco. But yeah, I'm curious to see what his stance is on some of those guys like an Eckler or like a Mike Williams, because he's obviously still paying attention to what's going on in the league.
Yeah, and that actually is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later when we get to our buy lows, Brett.
Awesome. So a good preview there. Zach, some pretty big news happening around the league. It really started out with the firing of Ron Rivera, which we kind of saw coming the last couple of weeks. It was sort of written in the etched in stone. But then we got a big surprise out of Tennessee. They let go of Mike Vrabel, and they pick out a voice as well. And so you're like, okay, Vrabel's going to end up taking the Patriots job, and he's going to be the defensive coordinator for Belichick. Well, then all of a sudden, Bill Belichick, he gets let go, and now he's a free agent. So landing spots that we're seeing and some of the teams that they're meeting with. Atlanta Falcons seems to be a big name. Obviously, the Los Angeles Chargers were a name that were meeting with some of the coaches before they hired Harbaugh. But let's take Atlanta, for example, and what would happen if a guy like a Bill Belichick or Mike Vrabel would head down to Atlanta to be their coach?
So that's an interesting topic for me because I think Atlanta, when you're looking at their roster, like the thing that probably needs some work is that offense. And you're talking about Mike Vrabel and Bill Belichick, who are pretty defensive minded in most of their plans. I mean, Vrabel a little bit more offensive than Belichick, but not even too much. It's more like ground and pound type of offense for a guy like Mike Vrabel. So I think if you're Atlanta, yes, it could be a good hire to bring in Belichick because of the experience, or bring in Vrabel to kind of bring in that they give those guys that extra oomph in Atlanta, because they were definitely lacking some of that under Arthur Smith. I think they need to focus a little bit more on that offense, though. I think the offense is the problem more than their defense. So I would be a little bit questioning that hire if it was one of those two guys in Atlanta, Brett.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, listen, I think that it really just comes down to the quarterback position for them, because they couldn't move the ball. And we're talking about an offense that 3 years in a row, they went high picks in the top 10 for offensive guys. We're talking Kyle Pitts, we're talking Drake London, we're talking Bijan Robinson. And none of those three guys really had a big effect from a fantasy perspective, with the exception of Bijan. But then there were still games where there was one game where Bijan didn't even play, and everybody, if you remember, was up in arms about that. And I think that they really do need to find, if they're going to go with a Belichick or a Vrabel, they really need to have a strong offensive coordinator candidate, I believe, because, I mean, listen, we watched the Patriots and what the Patriots were for the last couple of years, and when they didn't have a quarterback, then they had Mac Jones, obviously. Like, it was a struggle. And, they didn't really have any fix for it. Bill O'Brien was there, and, a couple other guys were trying to turn the tides, and they were bringing in more people to try to oversee this offensive, weapons. And, they put in Juju Smith-Schuster. It turned out to be pretty much nothing. It was a negative year for Juju. Seems like Ramondre Stevenson was the only thing going for that Patriots offense. And so, yeah, I think that they're a quarterback away. Unless they get that quarterback, I'm not sure how much success they're going to have, unless they're just pounding it to Bijan the entire time. But that won't really help, as far as the other two guys go from a fantasy perspective. So curious to see who Atlanta hires more than most teams. Ron Rivera getting some calls as a coordinator. We'll see if that comes to fruition. The Eagles, they go out and, take a loss in the playoffs, and they fire both coordinators. I think this is a really interesting opportunity here. And, we caught some news earlier today about a potential opening. Zach, do you remember who it was? It was Vic Fangio. Vic Fangio. So it seems like Vic Fangio is right now the top target for the defensive coordinator position for the Philadelphia Eagles. Probably would be good. Listen, the Eagles' defense from last year to this year, not great. It was not a good transition year for them. They were not that scary defense that we saw the year prior. So, yeah, there was definitely a change needed on defense. The offense on the other side, it was questionable. That it was almost like they were using it as a scapegoat for Sirianni keeping his job. That's kind of how I took it. How do you take it?
It's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, you look at the firing of both offense and defensive coordinators. They finished top 10 in total offense, Brett, and bottom 10 in total defense. So, I mean, defense, it clearly made sense. Offense, a little bit questionable. I mean, obviously, they finished the season 1-6. So, that's not going to help when somebody's job's on the line there. 20-plus points in just one of those 6 losses, Brett. So, I mean, they weren't putting up points, and that's a lot of the reason why they lost those games. They just couldn't keep up with the opposing offense. And a lot of those teams were, you would probably say, a fair amount worse than the Eagles, and they probably shouldn't have lost those kind of games. But they ended up going 1-6 to finish the season. Uh, I think Sirianni deserved to keep his job because although it was 1-6, they were, what was it, like 11-1, 10-1 to start the year. So I mean, they had a really, really good stretch to start the season. It kind of just fell apart when it came towards the playoffs. So I think Sirianni definitely deserved to keep his job. Offensive coordinator, a little bit questionable there. They're going to need to really bounce back and be consistent for the full season. Defense was the problem, though. I think that's the key problem for this Eagles team. And obviously a couple of big losses in the offseason, but they kept a lot of their main stars, their big pieces on defense, and it just did not work out for them on defense this year. So probably going to be looking for a bounce back next season.
Yeah, also should be interesting to see just from the standpoint of it's an attractive job. As far as the offensive coordinator job goes, it's an attractive job. The defensive coordinator job, we just saw Vic Fangio, like former head coach. He's going to end up taking that job. They're two attractive jobs, and I think that having the weapons, the A.J. Browns and Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts, obviously, I think that, there will be somebody that is of a higher caliber that's going to want that job and get it.
Yeah, definitely agree with you.
All right, and our last piece of news here, some of the other guys that got hired around here or retained. Gerard Mayo, he gets the job in New England. Antonio Pierce, given the full-time role out there in Las Vegas as the full-time head coach, promoted from the interim. And Mike McCarthy, there were a lot of rumors about him as well in Dallas. Jerry Jones announces he is retained. He will coach out the last year of his contract. Zach, let's start New England because I think this one's interesting. Gerard Mayo, listen, this is a guy that Robert Kraft has been talking about for a couple of years now as the eventual successor, and he's got a lot of work ahead of him because, they're talking a lot of game about getting to this new era of Patriots football, but it seems like they're starting from square one.
Yeah, I mean, they are, Brett. They definitely are. He's been obviously the linebackers coach since 2019. So he's been there, obviously a former Patriot. So like he knows kind of what he wants to do there. It's kind of the Patriot way that they have up in New England. And of course, a ton of cap space. So he's going to have to work with that. Almost 70 million, I think it is, in cap space. So yeah. A lot of money there. So definitely going to probably bring some high free agents in there if they can. I think the biggest thing is they're going to need a really solid offensive staff. Of course, we all know what happened with Belichick and they drafted Mac Jones. Bill just can't really develop quarterbacks, and that's just the reality. I mean, he hasn't been able to so far since Brady left, and it's just been a difficult time for him. I think for Gerard Mayo and New England, they have to get a really solid offensive staff around probably a new quarterback. I think it's time for a new quarterback there in New England. I think the Mac Jones era might be pretty cloudy right now. I don't think they'll end up going back to him. Of course, Bailey Zappi there as well. I think it's just where they are in the draft, number 3 pick. I would be shocked if they went elsewhere from quarterback. So I think it's really about putting a solid offensive staff around whoever that new quarterback is, Brett.
I agree. And I think also what should be interesting is we don't know if he's the general manager or anything like that. Like for years, they had a de facto general manager in Bill Belichick, and he was kind of just running the ship. Curious to see if that changes or not. Because there's really been no news about that or no rumblings about it as well. Tight ship, obviously, in New England, as it always is, but curious to see if it's Gerard Mayo who's leading them forward and building out the roster, or if they will bring in somebody else. Moving along to Antonio. Zach, this was a rumor that came out just about a week ago. Max Crosby basically said, bring him in and bring him back or trade me. was pretty adamant that he wanted to be traded if he did not come in. But I think really piques my interest is Davante Adams and what this might mean for Davante Adams with Antonio Pierce coming in as the full-time head coach. We really saw Davante and how his reaction was to having Antonio Pierce as his coach. What do you think this means as far as a potential trade or no trade?
So, I mean, first off, with the Pierce hire, I think it's just a great job by Vegas. I think this guy kind of really like screams Raiders. I think it's just got that mentality. So I think it's really, really good for them. Hopefully, a guy like Jimmy Garoppolo can stay healthy. They give him a big contract. Like they're gonna want him to be the guy. I don't think Davante Adams is gonna end up being there, Brett. I think it's kind of at that point where Devontae he's not towards the end of his career, but he's kind of moving up there. He's getting up there in age. So it's kind of like, all right, when am I going to win? I think he's got that kind of mentality right now, and he should. He's one of the best in the NFL, Devontae Adams. So where am I going to win? When am I going to win? I think that is the big thing right now for Devontae Adams, and I think that's going to end up leading to a trade of some sort, because I don't think Vegas, with the roster that they have, is ready to go for it right now. I think Devontae would definitely fit better elsewhere than Vegas. They could get a pretty hefty package for him, though. I think that's important because of just the talent there.
That's true. I also think that knowing what his salary is and, retaining salary and taking the full salary, there's different packages there, because I think that in order for them to get a higher package, they're going to have to retain salary, because the salary cap hit is insane right now on him. If they are able to fully dump the salary, it might not be a first round pick. It could be less than that. Even a second round pick might take. I don't know. It is kind of interesting to talk about, and obviously there's the Aaron Rodgers connection, and that thing is still out there, and obviously that rumor is never going to go away. It's been going on for years, and it's been going on for a year, I should say, and dating back to last offseason when Rodgers first came in to the Jets, and I still think that that's the potential landing spot, and they went hard after him at the trade deadline. And listen, they were told no flat out, but I don't think that they're going to stop pushing for him. I think that obviously they just brought in a new general manager, and they just gave the guy the full reins of head coach, and so they're going to be smart about it. And I wouldn't be shocked if Devon got traded for some sort of package of picks.
Yeah, I agree.
And then lastly, Mike McCarthy, Zach. It's a guy that you and I go back and forth on all the time. He's a good coach. He's even sometimes he's a great coach. Sometimes he makes these boneheaded decisions, and you're like, how is this guy still a coach? And so, as far as the consistency of the offense this past year, I think he did a phenomenal job. I think that the offense finally looks like that's a Super Bowl offense. They had some banged up defenders, and so, led to them losing, and kind of an embarrassing fashion. But I think that Mike McCarthy won his job for this season, for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting topic right now, because they finished top 5, Brett, in offense and defense. And you can say, yeah, you probably didn't see that in the playoffs. You're right. And that's been the monkey on Mike McCarthy's back. Like, he really needs to get over that hump. And it's a problem right now, because obviously the expectation down in Dallas is Super Bowl or bust. That's just what it is. That's the business right now. I think they need to keep him right now, because I thought this season they were tremendous. I really did think the Dallas Cowboys looked really good, better than they have the couple of seasons before under Mike McCarthy. All you could say was they choked in the playoffs. They looked bad at home. Green Bay took advantage of them. Their defense looked terrible. Their offense was slow at the start. But I feel like you can either keep him and have a team that had a pretty strong regular season and you kind of focus on the playoffs. That's gonna be something heading into next year. Or you could bring in another guy, and I think that kind of maybe diminishes some of the chances you have of winning in the playoffs, because it kind of starts over from the head coaching spot.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I'm always going to put this in the Mike McCarthy arsenal here. That play where we saw Zeke get the ball and, he lined up just himself by there. It was like, what is happening right now? We saw a couple of those moments throughout the season where it was like, why is he the coach? But yeah, like you said, they were top 5 offense. Like Dak's going to end up getting this really big contract now, and he seems to be a Cowboy for life. And I'm curious what that actually means for the offseason prospects of Trey Lance, a guy who obviously just got dumped out of San Francisco and then became the 3rd quarterback in Dallas. Don't think he's going to end up staying around this next season. And I think that there'll be a team out there that says, hey, we can develop him, and gives Dallas something for him. I don't know that he's going to be sticking around as his 3rd quarterback with Dak getting this mega contract. And so, yeah, I mean, he won the job. Simple, McCarthy. He deserved it. I don't think that, listen, there were a lot of rumblings about, hey, they should go out and go get Bill Belichick and whatever. Too many personalities. I don't know that would have been a good fit with Jerry who likes to talk, and Bill Belichick who doesn't like to talk. I think it's perfect and it's fine. And Mike McCarthy is, he's a good coach. At the end of the day, he's a good coach.
Completely agree.
All right, so let's get into some of these offseason buy low candidates. Again, just to preface it, these are guys that their value, listen, it doesn't matter where their value is. Their value is lower right now than we think it will be come next season. So these are guys that you should cash in on right now and go out and go grab from around the owners in your league at a lesser price, because come April or come August, those prices will be astronomically higher. If not, if you're paying like a 2nd round pick now, he might be worth a 1st or 2 firsts later on. So Zach, let's trade back and forth with some guys. And I'm going to start with a 1A, 1B here. Justin Fields. I think that Justin Fields is in a spot where it's a very murky offseason. We're really not sure what's going to happen. As far as the Bears owning the number 1 pick, evaluating their quarterback situation, and Justin Fields is coming to the forefront of he's going to get replaced by Caleb Williams no matter what. And that's very, very well could happen. If he doesn't, then there's a very good chance that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to end up being that pick, and that the Bears will end up trading down a pick or two to recoup some assets there that they could go, and drop. And all of a sudden you're talking about Justin Fields playing with DJ Moore and Marvin Harrison Jr., which I think really changes the game for him. The value is way higher. Then there's the other scenario. Listen, they say, hey, we want Caleb Williams, and Justin Fields goes to the highest bidder. The Atlanta Falcons, I think, are that team that might go out and grab him. He's from the Atlanta area. They have a ton of weapons, and they're quarterback away. And so I think that, Justin Fields playing in an offense led by Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson would be insane. I really think that would be an offense that's really, really good. That's a playoff team. That's a playoff offense. And so, yeah, I think that that's a guy that you can go out right now and grab, and the value is not high at all, because a lot of the rumors out there are very murky, and we're not sure exactly what's going to be happening. And the other little caveat I'm going to throw into there, and which is why I say 1B, is Roschon Johnson, because this is a guy who's also on the Bears, didn't really have that great of a year. And I think that the whole offense really was not great, except for DJ Moore, who had a couple just absolute bombs of 40-point games. But it's a guy who we talked a lot about heading into the offseason, looking forward to seeing him take that next step and potentially outsnapping Khalil Herbert into next year.
Yeah, Brett, I mean, it's very funny. I was chuckling a little bit because, of course, a couple of years ago when Justin Fields was in the draft, I said that the Atlanta Falcons should go out and get Justin Fields. They ended up drafting Kyle Pitts and still haven't found a quarterback since then. So pretty funny. That would be pretty funny if they go in the end and get Justin Fields. I agree with you though, because I feel like the question marks right now have kind of hurt the value of Justin Fields just a bit because of, I mean, they're at number one. They got a choice there. If they want to trade down, if they want to draft a quarterback, kind of what's the mindset there? And people are going to still have questions for it. So I think that definitely puts Justin Fields at a buy low right now. And I agree with you on Roschon Johnson. I think a couple injuries definitely hurt him this year. I also think a couple injuries to Khalil Herbert hurt this year because then Deonta Foreman came in and took a big chunk of that workload for a little while, and then ended up just taking it for some part of the rest of the season. So I think Roschon Johnson, a lot of time, very young and very talented player coming out of the draft out of Texas. And I think he definitely can take the next step in this upcoming season.
Yeah, Zach, you have your first candidate here?
Yeah, and it's a guy that I know all too well. He's my dynasty quarterback, as the other quarterback from Justin Fields, who I also have, Brett. But it's Justin Herbert. I think right now the question marks about this offense in Los Angeles. Is Austin Eckler going to be there? What's going to happen? Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, injuries? Are they leaving? Are they staying? Just so many question marks. I think the one positive now is you say, oh, well, they just hired Jim Harbaugh. So I think that helps him. So it could have edged up a tiny bit today, but I still think he's a buy low because of the question marks about this offense. I think it and of course last season was pretty bad. It was pretty bad for Herbert's standards that he set. So I think, of course, the injury definitely didn't help him last season. I think right now the question marks on Herbert and this LA offense definitely puts him as a buy low, Brett.
Yeah, and he's going to be 26 at the start of the next season. And so, especially if you're in the super flex league, you got the owners that are panicking. And I think that Herbert is a guy that's still going to stick around as one of those top guys. And yeah, he wasn't last year. And, he battled a little bit of getting banged up. And listen, that happens. That's just part of the quarterback position. And we've seen it. We actually saw it, I think, this season more than we did in any other season as far as the quarterbacks getting hurt. But yeah, if I was to bet on anyone bouncing back and having a better year than they did last year at the quarterback position, it's this guy. We're talking about a guy who's finished as like a top 5 quarterback his first couple seasons, and now heading into his year 26 or his age 26 year. I think that there's an opportunity for him here to make some noise. And listen, they'll have a running back, whether it's Austin Eckler or they go out and sign one of the other guys that's out there. They will have him. Isaiah Spiller actually looked pretty good those last couple of weeks as well. So I'm sure Nick's in as well.
Yeah, and just quickly, we've seen Jim Harbaugh like work with offenses that haven't had a ton of talent. I mean, they've been okay. Now it kind of comes to a next level. Like he's working with a guy like Herbert, and even with maybe guys that you're not seeing that are as talented, he could still maybe figure it out with a guy like Herbert.
Yeah, completely. All right, so as far as my next guy here, it's Drake London, and we just kind of talked about the Atlanta Falcons. And yes, so there's a lot of risk here because talking about a 22-year-old guy, was picked in the top 10 of the draft. We've seen a lot of those guys end up being busts at the wide receiver position. Like Corey Davis, to me, is a guy that really comes to mind. As far as the fantasy value goes, listen, he was a good player, but obviously fizzled out and then went to the Jets afterwards and didn't really do much from a fantasy perspective. So Drake London right now, he's still a buy low candidate. He's going to be 23 years old, believe it or not, when the season starts next year, which is just so young. There's so many years left. And I think that, as we just talked about before, like Atlanta will go out and get a quarterback. Don't know who it's going to be, but that's their biggest need. And we know that they're going to try to go out and get a veteran guy, whether it's Kirk Cousins, whether it's Russell Wilson, whether it's Justin Fields. They will try to get one of those guys and bring him in because that's what their team needs most. And so, we're talking about a guy who, listen, he was still putting up wide receiver 2-like numbers in some weeks, even in a bad offense. And so now we're talking about potential that he has wide receiver 1 upside with a quarterback who can actually feed him the ball consistently. I think that's a guy that you go out and try to grab if you can. Probably is worth a high second to a late first as far as the value goes. And so I think that value could end up being higher if he booms, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's just all about the quarterback right now. With a guy like Drake London, another guy like Kyle Pitts, it's kind of just in that area of if they get a quarterback, they could really end up panning out, and it could be a really good target. But I mean, until they get that quarterback, I don't know where the belief is right now. So there is a little bit of risk in a guy like Drake London, but the talent is definitely there. I mean, they drafted him very high for a reason. Really talented wide receiver who just, I mean, if you get him the ball, he can really, really do some stuff and make a lot of problems for secondary. So I think definitely a buy low right now is Drake London.
And if they get Russell Wilson, listen, Drake London was really good at when the ball was underthrown at going and making the route run and going to get the catch. So listen, those Russell Wilson underthrown balls, it wouldn't be a problem, I don't think. We've seen some acrobatic plays this year from Drake London. Speaking of Russell Wilson, your guy actually just lost his quarterback, Russell Wilson. It's Javonte Williams.
Yeah, it's Javonte Williams, and I am kind of speechless on the season that Javonte had because, I mean, I had some expectations, but I also limited them a tiny bit because of the injury that he was coming off of, and that was kind of a question mark. Are they rushing him back? It seemed like he was ready, but I don't know if he was completely ready. I think we didn't see full 100% Javonte Williams. I think the quickness that he had definitely wasn't there from what we've seen in previous seasons. So I'm looking forward to this upcoming season with a guy like Javonte Williams because I think there's really not going to be as much pressure on him. I think more of they had those couple of guys behind him in McLaughlin as well as Samaje Perine, and they kind of were eating into his workload. And like I said, I don't think he was 100% healthy. I think they'll kind of go back to him because he definitely is their number one in Denver. So he's a buy low right now, though, because of how bad the season was. I mean, there's a guy who in Dynasty a couple of years ago, I drafted him second round. So I was pretty high on him. And that's really where his value was. He's still young. You just gotta pray as in all running backs, just no injuries. And as long as he's healthy, I think it could be a good year for Javonte.
Yeah, and we'll see what they do with the quarterback position as well and whether or not it leads to them having to do a running first offense if they don't have a strong quarterback. And so, listen, this could be a really big year for Javonte. I think that the price on him right now is a mid to low second round pick, and that's pretty good value for a guy that was for sure worth a first round pick heading into last season. Listen, he didn't crack the top 30 in any format this past year. And so there's a lot of hate on Javonte. And obviously, listen, he was hurt at the beginning of the year. And so it just kind of is a little bit misleading, and the offense was sort of broken. So I think this is a really good year where especially people are shying away from the running back position because now we're realizing there's a ton of committees. So yeah, I think this is a good pick. Certain guy who could be leading the charge next year, way ahead of McLaughlin and Perine.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, so my next guy here is Tyjae Spears, and Zach. It's a guy that we spoke about it this year for very good reason. We saw it coming. We knew that the cliff was going to come for Derrick Henry. all of a sudden, towards the end of the year, he starts feeding the ball to Derrick Henry. He looks like the Derrick Henry of old. And then he rides off into the sunset because he announces that he's leaving by thanking fans of Tennessee and of Nashville. And so in his final game, gets on the microphone, makes a big speech. And so we got the clear cut. Tajay Spears is going to end up being the number 1 running back next year for the Tennessee Titans. It's not going to be under their head coach, Mike Vrabel, obviously leaves, but I think Tajay Spears really proved himself this past year. I think that this is guy that has a lot of explosion in his run. He could be used as a gadget guy if they need it, and some of those end arounds. We saw him in the Wildcats past year as well. He averaged over 4.5 yards per carry. And so this is a guy who I think had a ton from the PPR points as far as receiving goes. We saw it a little bit this year. I think it's something that we'll be able to see at a more elite level as far as the PPR goes, because I think he's just going to get way more work than he got this year. Not to say that he didn't get a ton, but I think that the workload is going to be a ton more, especially when a guy like Derrick Henry is not there.
Yeah, and Brett, some people may be thinking, well, he's the number 1, so the value is going to be there. It really is not too much because, of course, the hiring or the firing of Mike Vrabel, then they're bringing in Ryan Callahan to be their head coach, the Bengals offensive coordinator. He's coming in. So, I mean, just a lot of question marks right now. And I think I agree with you that Spears is going to be the number 1. And we saw some really good stuff from him in this past season. I think the value is low right now because of question marks in this offense. And we'll see in the when it starts training camp of continuing to be that number 1 guy. Going to come into that role pretty well. So that's still a question mark, but a guy definitely to grab right now because it's still very young. He was a rookie last year, so a lot of time left in the NFL.
Yeah, if I had to put a price tag on him, it's probably like one of those later seconds to early thirds, even 2/3 if you have a later third. I think that would get it done just because I think that there's so much unknown. Again, there's a lot of talk about the running back position this year and what this offseason is going to bring because there's just a ton of guys out there. And so, pick off one of those guys who might end up being this number 1 guy next year. Pick off now before we know what's going on.
Yeah, definitely, bro.
All right, so your next guy actually comes up in Buffalo as Buffalo goes wide right.
Buffalo goes wide right. They know that all too well, Bills Mafia. So, I mean, it's kind of an obvious one here, and it's Stefon Diggs because the end of Stefon Diggs' season was one of the worst we've seen from Stefon Diggs in a very long time. So, and capped off by a drop against the Chiefs that on a long ball that he probably should have had, and that's kind of the story right now for Stefon Diggs because it just. Since week 10 or week 9, he's just been invisible. I mean, there's just not been a lot for him in this offense, and frustration was definitely brewing. But it definitely diminishes his value a little bit because he's 30 right now. He's getting up there in age, and maybe some contract talks, trade talks, whatever it is. Like, there's going to be a lot of noise going on about a guy like Stefon Diggs because – I mean, there kind of always is. So I think because of that, the value of Diggs is pretty low right now from where it was, you would say, at the start of the season and maybe even into the middle of the season where he was having those 100-yard games and doing really well in this offense. That just went all downhill. So he's a buy low in my mind right now, a guy that people should be looking for because the talent of Stefon Diggs, he's one of the best in the NFL. He's probably I would put him in the top 10. He could be on the edge of top 5 in terms of talent, pure talent at the wide receiver position. He definitely has it. So I think the big thing right now is go get him. I don't think you need to give up too much for a guy like Diggs because of the age, number 1, and because of the question marks and how he finished last season.
Yeah, listen, he only had 1, 2, 3 top 5 finishes, and another one in the top 6, and so yeah, it really wasn't there for him, and he's still a number 1 target. Yes, the rumors are going to be out there flying because they're everywhere here with Stephon Diggs, and then come February or March, he'll put some random tweet out like he does every year. Everybody will overanalyze it, say, "Oh, that means that he's requesting a trade," which he really won't be. Then he'll post another one in about May around OTAs. Same thing. Everybody say, "Oh, he wants out. He'll be fine. He's not going anywhere." It's the same thing every year. With Stephon Diggs' social media saga, taking the team in and out of his player bio. We've seen that multiple times every year. He's not going anywhere. I don't see it happening. He's the most important part outside of John in that sense. And so I think he's going to have a better year next year because it couldn't have gotten much worse than what he had this past year. So yeah, listen, I think that there will be an improvement. Yes, the age is starting to get up there, and he's 30, so he's going to be 31 come the start of next season. So yeah, there's another year or two left on him, I think. If you're selling him, don't sell for low because I don't know that his value right now is what it's going to end up being in the season. If you're really trying to trade him, I would wait till the start of next season because there's going to be a couple games where he goes off. He plays against the Bill Belichick-less New England Patriots and gets a couple big games and whatever. I think that's going to boost his value way beyond what it is right now. So I'm holding on Stephon Diggs. I'm not selling him. But if you have a guy who's out there trying to sell him for a not so high price, then yeah, go cash in on that one.
Yeah, 100% agree, bro.
All right, so my next guy here, my final guy here, is a guy that you know very well from our Dynasty league, and it's Garrett Wilson. Listen, to think what could have been Garrett Wilson this year, we were talking about a top 5 season. We were talking about he's getting picked in the second round of basically every draft, at the top of the second round, if not the back end of the first round in all the redraft leagues. Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback, comes in, and this is just be his go-to guy. He's going to get 15 to 20 targets every single game and score a ton of touchdowns, at least one every game. Didn't happen. 4 plays into the season, Aaron Rodgers tears his Achilles. The rest is history because they brought Zach Wilson in, and Garrett Wilson was not getting the ball. He was just not getting the opportunities at all. Sat as a top 25 wide receiver, but he was like wide receiver 23, I think, was where he ended up finishing by the end of it. So listen, there were some games that he had where you were like, wow, the talent is still really there, and he's still an elite wide receiver. He just doesn't have the quarterback play. Well, lucky for us, we watched the last couple weeks of the season where Aaron Rodgers looked like he was going to crack. Jets, unfortunately, were out of the race, and that ended up stomping on the fire, and so he did not end up coming back. We did not see that Garrett will break out at the end of the season in the playoffs game, but it looks like Aaron Rodgers is healthy. He had a hole-in-one. It looked like playing off with the offensive line out in Las Vegas this week, and yeah, he's healthy. And so now you take a look at what the Jets offseason looks like. They're going to go out and they're going to get another receiver. That seems to be pretty clear. They tried for one over the deadline, and it was Mike Evans, I believe they went after. They went after Devontae Adams. Now we're going to see what happens in this offseason. They're going to try to go out and get one of those guys. I don't think that stopped. I have this feeling that it's going to end up being Devontae Adams over any other guy just based on the Aaron Rodgers factor and what we think that could be. We saw that he actually switched his number, Garrett Wilson, to number 5. Off of number 17, so number 17 is now available. Wing nudge. And so, listen, if he's the second receiver to Devontae Adams, he's still going to have an insane season because I think that by taking the top cornerback off of each roster because they have to guard Devontae, Garrett Wilson's going to feast in this offense, plain and simple. So I still think that right now, you probably can get the guy for a second-round pick, if not a low first round pick just based off of this last year. And his value is way higher than that. It just is. His value is a first round pick. It should be. And he's just not going for that right now. So to me, he is going to end up having one of these top 5 wide receiver seasons next year, no matter who is the other receiver lining up on the other side of the field, as long as Aaron Rodgers is there back healthy.
Yeah, I was going to say this season really just stunk for Garrett Wilson because I mean, all the expectations, we talked about it going into this season. We're like, it's going to be an unbelievable year for Garrett Wilson. He's got Aaron Rodgers. He's got a quarterback. What can go wrong? And then it turned into a disaster of a season because he didn't have a quarterback. So, I mean, that's the big problem right now for the Jets. And Rodgers hopefully comes back and 100% healthy, knock on wood, like a full season of health for him. And if that's the case, then hell yeah, they're going to be really, really dangerous on offense. If they get another receiver, even more dangerous on offense. So definitely a buy low right now, Garrett Wilson, because a lot of people are just thinking, oh no, like I feel like people think of kind of like the long run a little bit more as well. They're like, oh, what's going to happen after Rodgers? Well, we'll get to what happens after Rodgers when that happens. I think right now you got to live in the present, and you're going to say, okay, well, he's going to have a good quarterback giving him the ball, a Hall of Famer getting him the ball. That's what you can ask for. That's as a wide receiver. So definitely the value is low right now. A guy to go out and grab because there's some people not very high on him. I have him. I'm very high on him because I mean the age. He's so freaking young, and I think he's got a really strong NFL career ahead of him, Brett.
Yeah, agree. And I still think that, listening to what Rodgers has said, they're going to play multiple years together. And I don't think this is a one and done at all. I think that listening to him on the Pat McAfee show a couple weeks ago, he was talking all about how this Achilles injury really opened up his eyes of ways to recover his body better. And that he thinks he can get 2 or 3 years into the Jet system. And that's not counting this season. So he still thinks he has 2 or 3 seasons left. And that should be music to Garrett Wilson's ears because it could be a long partnership than just the one and done year that many people are expecting.
Yeah, definitely, Brett.
All right, so your last guy here is a tight end, a guy to go out and grab. And Zach, let's hear it.
Yeah, I went a little bit of a different way. Guy probably not a lot of people are expecting here, but I think the talent is definitely there. It's Luke Musgrave because, of course, the injury that makes me cringe every time I hear it, he had a lacerated kidney for a long stretch, and he played week 11 and then was out till week 18. He played against the Chicago Bears in a must-win game, and so he played in that one. But I think the biggest thing was Luke Musgrave was really good to start the season. He had 10 games, 5 of them he was in the top 15, and that was also with Tucker Kraft right next to him. Then Luke Musgrave goes out, Tucker Kraft comes in. Tucker Kraft looks like he's Rob Gronkowski all of a sudden. So he looked really good. Then he ends up kind of splitting it when it came to Musgrave coming back. But I feel like a lot of people who drafted Musgrave don't really see the value in a guy like Musgrave because of what Tucker Kraft was able to do. They're going to think it's more of maybe a committee at tight end and 2 tight end. And I think Luke Musgrave is the guy. I think he's the top tight end. And when fully healthy, he's the more talented tight end on this roster. So I think they're going to go to him like they did to start the season. He had a couple games with 6 receptions in this offense where there was a ton of different weapons that Jordan Love could go to. He chose to go to Luke Musgrave. So I think that really stands out to me, and a buy low because of the injury and maybe some expectations lowered a little bit on Musgrave because of what Kraft was able to do while he was out.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, this is a young offense that's still developing. We saw the talent of Jordan Love. A lot of people doubted him, and seems to have proved a lot of those people wrong, especially that Dallas game in the playoffs. Like, he looked good. He just looked like an elite quarterback. He looked like he could be this next Aaron Rodgers, as they all keep proclaiming him. Luke Musgrave was great leading into the season. They obviously had drafted 2 tight ends, and we weren't really sure who the first guy was going to be. Then they line up and Luke Musgrave guy. And we're like, okay, he's just going to be this 1A, 1B. He sort of just won the job right away because he was able to get himself off of the linebackers very quickly. He actually led the league he led the league for tight ends target separation, which is an advanced analytic stat that a lot of people go off of. He led the whole league in that. And so I think that he has a chance right now to develop himself into that elite option for Jordan Love to just get every single time. And, Rob Gronkowski, that safety valve. And we've seen that across the league where that's starting to be a thing. Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, and the list goes on of those volume safety valves we saw for TJ Hawkinson for so many years in Detroit. And he could be one of those guys. And I think he really proved that this year. 6th place in receptions and 20 plus more yards for all of 10s. I think that the ability to get down the field quickly and the ability to get open, it really is going to turn into, a match made in heaven with Jordan Love. So, yeah, I love the pick. I think that, a tight end is not that expensive as well. And that's something that, really looking at because of the decline of the top end of tight ends. Obviously, Hawkinson gets hurt. Obviously, Mark Andrews gets hurt. Travis Kelce did not have a good season. And so it slides the rest of those guys down even further and what those values are. So, yeah, it's a good pick. Shouldn't cost you a lot.
Yeah, 100%, Brett.
All right, so Zach, that's going to do it here. A little bit of a short episode here, but, we just wanted to check in with our fans here for some offseason buy lows. Next week, we're going to get to our offseason sell highs. Guys that, maybe are at the very end of their peak, or the cliff is just coming and it's like, hey, get out now for the end of next season where they might not be that great.
Yeah, Brett. I mean, there's some guys that I kind of have the top of my head that are sell highs that you probably are just not going to sell them. You grabbed one in the middle of this season. His name is Patrick Mahomes. That's an interesting one. A lot of big names there. So excited for next week's show.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting just because, like you said, there's a lot of bigger name guys, and we'll be sure to go through them. Guys who were, a lot of them are 1st or 2nd round picks in redraft, and it's just there's a lot of unknowns out there this offseason. And so the league is certainly going to look quite a bit different come next season.
100%, Brett.
All right, so that'll do it for this week. Subscribe to us on YouTube, wherever you get the podcast, and give us a thumbs up. And in the words of Aaron Rodgers, the night is darkest before the dawn. We shall rise it again. For Zach Malamed, I'm Brett Malamed. This has been the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. We will catch you guys next week.